Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. Today, we're going to talk about the special counsels that have been appointed to deal with Hunter Biden, appointed to deal with the classified documents, circumstances facing both President Trump and President Biden, and just do a little compare and contrast in terms of how the various special counsels seem to handle things. And when you do that, it becomes pretty clear the special counsels have been appointed to deal with Joe Biden's problems, Hunter Biden's problems, are effectively lapdogs. They don't have any real teeth. They don't have any intention of having any teeth. They're trying to get out from under having to do something. Whereas the special counsel appointed to go after President Trump resorts to the dirtiest of dirty tricks, goes after the attorneys of defendants, threatening to really harm the careers of the attorneys of the defendants, trying to make it so you have defendants are forced to roll over rather than actually fight back when they believe that they're innocent, by denying them legal counsel and making it clear that the legal counsel will pay a huge price for defending those defendants. So we have two different circumstances, two different approaches, two different, shall we say, systems of justice. And so I just wanted to go through some of the things that are happening with the special counsels who've been appointed to deal with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's circumstances. And I'm going to start with the first special counsel who was actually appointed. His name is Robert Hur. Robert Hur was appointed about 2 weeks after Donald Trump got a special counsel for having classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. You'll remember that Donald Trump had Mar-a-Lago raided by the FBI in a surprise raid, guns drawn, where they went in and explored Mar-a-Lago, at least the residential quarters of Mar-a-Lago from top to bottom, looking through everything to find classified documents, all of which were legally there. The FBI knew they were legally there. They knew that the president had a right to have those documents. They knew that the president acknowledged he had those documents. They knew that the president was in a negotiation with the National Archives over what should be treated as a official presidential document and what should not be. They knew that when they went and they boxed up a whole bunch of things from Mar-a-Lago, some of which were things like Time magazine covers that were under glass and other things like that, which clearly were not classified documents. They knew that they actually had about a box of so-called classified documents. And what they should have known is, after investigating before they do a raid, they should have known that the president had, in fact, declassified those documents. And even if that hadn't formally occurred, even though Kash Patel, who was part of his national security team, validated publicly that, in fact, President Trump had declassified those documents, they should have known that just by virtue of the president of the United States moving the documents while he was president, he had, in effect, declassified those documents and had every legal reason to be able to have those documents in his possession. So they should have known all those things, but of course they did know those things. But nothing was going to get in the way of the FBI. Nothing was going to get in the way of the Department of Justice, of the Biden Department of Justice, from going after Donald Trump. And so we end up with a classified documents case that results in 37 different indictments. Because after all, if President Trump moves in Mar-a-Lago anywhere near a classified document that's no longer classified, a formerly classified document, that's clearly a violation of law. On the other hand, you have Joe Biden, who apparently had classified documents strewn all over his home in Rehoboth. Classified documents not from when he was president, classified documents from when he was vice president 4 years earlier. Classified documents he had no legal right to have because he wasn't president. He couldn't declassify documents, but he had them anyway. classified documents that were in the Penn Center, the Biden Penn Center, a completely made up entity that was made out of whole cloth to provide Joe Biden with a place to work after the vice presidency, and funded by the Chinese. So the Penn Center had, which was essentially apparently an empty room, had a bunch of documents that were classified there, that were being kept there, and which were, not kept under any particular secure environment. Now, let's be clear. Vice presidents don't have any right to have classified documents. They don't. They have absolutely no legal right to have classified documents. They do have a right to access those documents. And typically what happens for a Secretary of State or somebody who's writing a book, a national security official who's writing a book, is they request documents that they need. That gets put into a secure location, that like a library with double locks, and they then can go in, they can review the documents, they can take notes, they can do those things. They can't take pictures of them, but they can take notes and the like, refresh their memory, because these guys often write memoirs, they write books, they do all those kind of things, and you want to make certain that they actually reflect the record of what happened. So that's a courtesy given to people. What's more, former officials in those positions maintain their security clearances. So you have an absolute security clearance, and as a result, they have an ability to seek those kind of classified documents. What they don't have an ability to do is take them home with them. What they don't have an ability to do is to store them in their garage or put them in folders in their office. They don't have a right to stack them up in boxes inside the Penn Center, the Biden Penn Center. They don't have that. They don't have that right. They certainly don't have the right to have classified documents when they were a U.S. senator, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. They don't have that right. And yet Joe Biden had classified documents from both when he was a senator and when he was vice president. And we don't know what the situation is as president, because he's got a right to have any classified documents pretty much anywhere he wants them as president. So let's be clear. That is this is not talking about time as president, because presidents have the right to have classified documents. All powers to classify or stem from the executive, from the Oval Office. And anything that Joe Biden declares to be classified is classified. Anything he declares to not be classified is not classified. Anything, if he can drive down the streets of Rehoboth, throwing classified documents in the air, and it would be legal, and for anybody to grab and see, and it would be legal, because he's the president. He can declassify any document he wants to. So let's be clear. That is true for Joe Biden, just as it was true for Donald Trump, just as it was true for every president that preceded them. But let's just look at what we're talking about. We have here's a clip that's a fun one. I was trying to figure out whatever happened to this Robert Hur guy, and how come we haven't heard anything from this guy when the Trump special prosecutor Jack Smith is all over the news indicting Trump on virtually everything. So what do you have? You have an article. Biden attorneys are in talks with special counsel Robert Hur over terms to interview the president. Now, this is kind of a normative thing. He's going to interview Joe Biden. Typically, you don't, as a prosecutor, you don't interview the subject of your investigation until the end of your investigation. This is the breadth of the special counsel is, in this instance, appears to be, although we haven't seen it, appears to be very narrow. Take a look at the classified documents and make it go away. So that's what he's doing. And very quietly hiring some staff, but apparently not much. I was able to find one article indicating he had 4 or 5 people working for him. And what they're doing is they going through and finding the classified documents. Are there any more classified documents? How did those classified documents get there? And deciding whether to prosecute based on that. The interesting thing is, the special counsel has no right to prosecute the president of the United States on anything. He's got a get out of jail free card in terms of prosecutions, outside prosecutions, until after he's president. So consequently, there's absolutely no outcome for her that can exist related to this. And so what you're going to get out of Robert Hur is this. He's going to interview Biden, and he's going to write a report. And the report will come out sometime in the middle of, this is my speculation, sometime between June and September of 2024, during the middle of the election. The report will say, while Joe Biden probably shouldn't have had these documents in his possession, there's no reason to find any criminality and intent to violate the law. And since clearly he didn't intend to violate the law and was acting in good faith, should be given, there's no action recommended by the special counsel. Hence effectively giving Joe Biden, even though he violated the law, a get out of jail free report that the Biden campaign will use. That's the report that Robert Hur will most likely write. And this is speculation on my part, but it's the whole reason he was set up to do this. He's set up to write a report that exonerates Biden. At the same time, you'll have Jack Smith going and prosecuting Trump, who legally could have the documents, unlike Biden, who legally had their documents on charges that are just completely, contrived. Because Jack Smith's job is to take down Donald Trump and to create as much mess and legal mess around Donald Trump as possible. That's his job. That's what he's been appointed to do. So, and I mean, I know this sounds cynical, but I think it's based on what we've seen. There's no other place you can come down on this. So when you look at Robert Hur, his job is simple: to basically cover up the Biden classified documents and say he had no intent to break the law, and while technically he was in violation, there is absolutely no reason to pursue in any way, shape, or form any kind of indictments or anything like that. And you can be assured, one thing you need to know and should know is that if you're David Petraeus and you're the CIA director and you leave your calendar out, where somebody else with the same security clearance sees it, it can be used as a means to threaten you with prosecution and force you to resign from the CIA. Not coincidentally, just a few short days after you refused to have the CIA take the blame for the Benghazi debacle. And so the punishment for not taking the blame like a good soldier was, well, we knew you did something wrong, so and we're going to now threaten you with it and force you to resign. Well, that's how Petraeus was handled. He was forced to resign as CIA director because his calendar was revealed to a mistress who happened to also have a security clearance, and as a result of that, leaving his calendar out, that one charge, he had to resign. Could not be. That was a resignable offense for a CIA director who didn't do his job and take the fall for Obama and Hillary off the Benghazi murder of 4 Americans in Benghazi due to America's government, the Obama administration, abandoning them. So Petraeus took the fall. He wouldn't take the fall, so he got booted out based on classified documents. If you're a Navy intelligence officer and you transmit a classified document using a non-secure source, you go to jail. Happens all the time. Hillary Clinton classified documents of her unsecured source. Not only did she not go to jail, her attorneys are the ones that went through all the documents, all of her emails, not the FBI. Her attorneys went through all the emails and told the FBI what mattered and what didn't matter. Boy, there's a reliable source. Hillary Clinton attorneys. But she didn't face any prosecution for it. Nothing to see here. So the history here on the classified documents is clear. If you're a Democrat and you're a favored son of a Democrat, if you're a favored person, there's no penalty to pay. But if you don't toe the line, you get fired. By the way, Petraeus was a Democrat. If you don't toe the line, you don't take a hit when it wasn't your, let your agency take the fall when it wasn't your agency's fault. You get punished. And if you're Donald Trump, you end up having the book thrown at you, and they invent books to try to throw at you. That's what the result of the different special counsels are on this issue. One special counsel is a pussycat designed to cover up. Robert Hur designed to cover it up. Jack Smith, his job is to destroy Donald Trump. It's why Congress needs to tell the Department of Justice that there's no room for special counsels anymore. If they're going to have this position, it can't be a position created out of whole cloth by the Department of Justice. It has to be something that Congress actually creates, and that has has to deal with, has a short time frame, and is designed specifically to get to facts without any open-ended investigations, the way that Robert Mueller was given to go after Trump, or Jack Smith has been given to go after Trump. Let's look at the, just as an example here of what's happening with Trump and the special counsel. This is from July 28th of this year, so about a month ago, a little less than a month ago. We all know this. They came out with a whole bunch of more indictments. The interesting thing that occurred in this particular case is they broadened the number. They created a new defendant, and the new defendant is the head of maintenance at Mar-a-Lago. And they created an allegation that that there was an attempt to, or at least a demand by President Trump, that that the video cameras in Mar-a-Lago be disabled. They're trying to create an 18-minute gap. They're trying to create the missing tape that they could then infer all sorts of malfeasance because the tapes aren't, the video doesn't exist. Subsequently, we learned that Trump saying, listen, the videos all exist, and we've been trying to give them to the FBI for months. And so it's a fact point that's going to go back and that we're going to have to figure out. But what we learned in that is that the other defendant, who's not Trump, a gentleman named Walter Nata, was, in fact, his attorney was threatened by the special counsel's office, by Jack Smith's office, threatened very specifically that he will never get a federal judgeship. He'll never be confirmed to a federal judgeship ever, if he continues to represent Mr. Nata. Now, how the heck does that make any sense? You sit there and you look at it. How can you try to deny? How can you try to intimidate the defense attorney? In the world, that's not supposed to happen. In the American system of justice, that's not supposed to happen. But it is. That's what happened. And it's nothing different than what has happened to people who've defended Trump. In the Fulton County indictment, people like John Eastman have been indicted. It just was announced that he's got a $100,000 bond for bail in Fulton County. And he's not a wealthy man. John Eastman he's guilty of one thing. He's guilty of giving Donald Trump legal advice. And it didn't conform with what the Fulton County DA thought he should give him as legal advice. And even if you see the idea that it was bad legal advice, which I'm not sure it was, but if you say, oh, that's bad legal advice, it's not a crime to give bad legal advice. It's not a crime to give bad legal advice. John Eastman's very smart. He's a distinguished. He's a former clerk to Justice Clarence Thomas. He's very smart and highly regarded prior to what's going on now. And now because he gave legal advice to Donald Trump, he's being charged. That's his crime, giving legal advice. If you can't give legal advice to somebody without fear of prosecution for giving legal advice, how is anybody going to be able to stand up and defend themselves against federal government prosecution? If you're not allowed to defend a defendant against a federal prosecution without fear of losing opportunities to be a federal judge in the future. If you're not allowed to do that defense, how is somebody going to find a defense attorney who can stand up and have the quality and intellect to be able to stand up and fight against a federal prosecutor with all the resources in the world? Who's going to do that? Gee, it's going to harm my career because I'm doing this. Not only is it going to harm my career, but I'm now, I essentially am committing career suicide. Not just minor thing, career suicide by defending this guy. How many people are going to do that? Fact is, what the left is depending on is very few. This isn't necessarily about Donald Trump. This isn't necessarily about Walter Nauta. It's about when anybody else gets arrested for a thought crime, who's going to stand up? Where are they going to find an attorney? They're not. They're not. Because no attorney in their right mind is going to sacrifice their potential career to be able to fight, to defend them. Who's going to fight? And when's the next president? Let's say Donald Trump becomes president again, or anybody else, it doesn't matter. And they're going to people from outside of their administration for legal advice, saying, "What do you think?" And somebody offers legal advice on ways that they can proceed. Who's going to offer that legal advice? Who's going to offer that wisdom and real knowledge about the law? And who's going to debate alternatives about the choice of actions that should be taken, when that very debate can put you in the eyes of a special counsel 4 years later and make it so you have to make it essentially, you can be broke. You can be driven into bankruptcy as a result. Who's going to offer that advice? Nobody. And that, my friends, is what this is all about. Yes, they're taking down Donald Trump, but they also want to make it so you have prosecutors with no fear of facing top defense counsel, because top defense counsel won't be available. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to deny you and me the capacity to defend ourselves in a court of law, because we won't have the top defense counsels to try to keep us from being subjected to what Donald Trump is being subjected to. This is nothing more than legal intimidation, and it's evil, it's wrong, and quite honestly, it's un-American. I did want to point out that I think I already went and did that. There's a story in the New York that came out in the New York Times on the 20th. I guess it's on the 19th. Inside the collapse of the Hunter Biden plea deal, and this kind of shows you what Weiss was up to as a U.S. attorney, who's now the U.S. attorney, or now the special counsel in some magic wave of the wand. And the interesting part about this is that somehow Weiss's negotiator on this offered up a deal and had effectively signed off on a deal for Hunter Biden, where he would have faced no jail time and would have just had to pay back. He wouldn't have had to plead guilty. He just would have had to pay back the IRS, the federal government, for taxes he didn't pay. So essentially, make good, just pay the money that you owe, and we'll just call it even. No harm, no foul. Gun charge goes away. That was the deal that was really on the table initially. And then the IRS whistleblowers came out and told the truth publicly about what was happening. And suddenly Weiss backed out of that deal and said, no, we're going to have to get some kind of prosecution out of that. And so they went back and forth between Weiss and the Hunter Biden attorneys, went back and forth, and they decided on a deal, which was, we all know what it was. It was a 1 year in jail, in a country club, and no dropping the gun charge, and paying $1 million to the federal government in restitution for basically not paying his taxes on hundreds of millions of dollars, or tens of millions of dollars anyway. So he had a. So that was the deal. What happened? It became public, and people said, "Wait a second, nobody. That's a deal nobody else gets. What do you mean?" And the judge asked questions. The judge sat there, and there were all sorts of controversy. But one of the big controversies was the the actual Hunter Biden's attorneys tried to get they called the clerk of the House, or not clerk of the House, clerk of the court, and the weekend before the plea agreement was supposed to go through, and pretended they were the House Judiciary Committee, and that they wanted to rescind a filing that the House Committee had given to them, laying out the reasons why Hunter Biden should be prosecuted based on everything that they had learned through their investigations. And the clerk noticed that the caller ID, apparently the attorneys for Hunter Biden aren't that sharp, and they don't realize the caller ID exists. And the clerk noticed the caller ID wasn't from the House Judiciary Committee or a 202 number. It was from the actual attorneys of Hunter Biden's attorneys. And the clerk turns into the judge. The judge says, "This is squirrely," and starts asking questions at the hearing for the plea agreement. And in asking those questions, the entire thing unraveled because Weiss's team said, "Oh, we might pursue other charges." And Hunter Biden's team said, "Wait a second, this plea agreement, you're not supposed to, it ends all that. You're not supposed to pursue any more charges. That's why we pled guilty." And they disagreed. And now Hunter Biden is charged with nothing. They've dropped all the charges against Hunter Biden. And Weiss is now in charge as a special counsel to go around and try to figure out what he couldn't figure out for 4 years, how to get Hunter Biden out of this mess. That's what his job is, how to get Hunter Biden out of this mess. And oh, by the way, it's almost guaranteed that they will come up with an indictment of Hunter Biden on something. And once again, this is my speculation, sometime in September of 2024. And that indictment will effectively say, we found no wrongdoing by any other parties. This was Hunter Biden was acting by himself, all by his lonesome, was not respond. There was absolutely no connection whatsoever to his father. And believe us, we're the special counsel, and will provide the September-October counter to the Joe Biden is a crook narrative, which is going to be one of the primary narratives in the election campaign in 2024. So they'll be the counterfact to that narrative, and by playing "see no evil, hear no evil." And the reason we can guess that pretty accurate, I think, with pretty strong certainty, is Weiss has been playing that role for 4 years. Got this case in 2018. You knew about the laptop. Part of the laptop being buried to the FBI was, guess what? Weiss knew about the laptop. He didn't do anything with it. Weiss's whole job under this circumstance has been to cover this up and make it go away. Make it go away. It's his job. And unfortunately for Weiss, but fortunately for the country, the IRS whistleblowers came forward and said, "This is crazy," and went public with it. And then the IRS basically moved those whistleblowers off of the case, giving those whistleblowers absolutely nothing they had nothing to lose to continue to come forward. And because of those whistleblowers, by the way, at least one of them is a Democrat. Because of those whistleblowers, we are in a position right now of knowing a lot more about what Hunter Biden's dealings were, and knowing a lot more that the now special counsel Weiss has absolutely no intention of prosecuting Hunter Biden and his father to the fullest extent of the law, recognizing that the special counsel can't prosecute his father because his father's president. Once again, that's a key component here. Just as Mueller couldn't prosecute Donald Trump when Donald Trump was president, and we made that point ad nauseum during the Trump administration, this special counsel has no power whatsoever to prosecute Joe Biden. And so the whole purpose, once again, of this is to throw, Hunter may have to fall on the sword, but it's going to be to exonerate Joe Biden during the election campaign. It's really a tale of two special counsels, isn't it? You got special counsels for Biden, special counsels for Trump. The special counsels for Trump have long teeth and don't really care about the rules. They'll do anything in an attempt to take down Donald Trump. And the special counsels for Biden are by design, nothing more, nothing less than the obstructors of justice and providing the political cover-up needed to be able to make it so Joe Biden can survive the next election campaign. And folks, that, unfortunately, is the unvarnished truth. Let's take a look at what we have in the chat room here. By the way, if you have not subscribed to Americans for Limited Government, I would encourage you. Wow, that's crazy what's going on there on the screen, isn't it? Let's see if I can fix it, make this better. I am going to make this better, I promise. I need to do that. And now I can drag that over. Much better. Much better. Okay. So if you haven't subscribed to the ALG here on Facebook or elsewhere, please subscribe. It's if you like the content we're doing, it really does. It helps a lot in terms of our capacity to continue to provide it for you. And obviously share this information with others, because the way to get the Facebook and the YouTube algorithms and the Rumble algorithm, for that matter, to work, and the Twitter algorithm to work, is for people to share. That's how the system works. So it's really important that you share. Let's look what we have. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't have a cough or sneeze button here on the set here. Betsy, how are you, Betsy? They knew Trump and his family wasn't there at the time. They came at that time for this reason. Yeah, they did know that the FBI did know that Trump and his family wasn't at Mar-a-Lago when they did their raid, and that would have. The fact is, if President Trump or his family had been at Mar-a-Lago, it would have put the Secret Service in a really difficult position, because it would have gotten a little spicy between the Secret Service and the FBI under those circumstances. John Miller, the FBI also knows that Joe Biden has no right to have those documents. Did they dare march in and seize those? Hell to the no. They absolutely knew that Joe Biden had no right to those documents, and and just as the Weiss team, somebody in the Weiss team at the U.S. Attorney's Office alerted Hunter Biden's lawyers that the IRS was intending to do a raid on a storage locker that Hunter Biden had, that they had reason to believe had documents that would show a lot of the financial entanglements that help make their case in terms of Hunter Biden's culpability in terms of tax fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office, Weiss's office, leaked that to Hunter Biden's attorneys, and as a result, the raid never occurred. Because it got delayed, at which point there was no reason for it, because Hunter Biden's attorneys had moved everything out. They presumed that they'd moved everything out of the storage locker and moved it to places where it couldn't be found, or destroyed it. So you've got so the IRS investigation into Hunter Biden's failure to pay his taxes got obstructed by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Whereas in the case of our good friend President Trump, these guys are, there's no indignity that isn't that hasn't been foisted upon him. Remove the China Biden administration crime spree now, disgrace the U.S. Alvin, thanks for writing in, and it is. And one of the things that I find that's come out that's interesting on the, I don't think we would have known otherwise based on the classified documents case, is that China was a major funder of the Biden Penn Center. So basically, Biden's salary that he received from the Penn Center after he left the vice presidency was paid for by China. So this is not a guy it's not unusual for China to be paying Biden's. And part of the China payments for Biden's was to support the Biden Penn Center. And University of Pennsylvania doesn't set these things up because they like setting things up. They set it up because they raise money, because it's a moneymaker for them. And that is what happened. So once again, Joe Biden, a direct beneficiary of Chinese cash. No way to put it any different. That is what is true, and there's no way to deny it. Let's see here. There we go. I'm going to go with this one. Sherry Nook. Sherry, we may not agree, but I like your cat. But you would vote for this man, LOL. There's a Bloomberg article that I'm not going to click on because I don't subscribe to Bloomberg. All the charges Trump faces, all the prison time. Yeah, Sherry, here's the deal. You can put all those charges up, but if you recognize the fact that the entire classified document case is a fraud, the case up in New York is an FEC violation that the New York District Attorney has absolutely no jurisdiction over. And what's more is the FEC itself voted not to pursue legal action on. So we've got a New York District Attorney who's acting on something that isn't in his jurisdiction, isn't state law, and has nothing to do with New York City, and will not survive any kind of federal appeal because it's not his jurisdiction. He's out of his lane. Okay, so that's B. The C is the Atlanta one, and the Atlanta one is, Donald Trump sought to engage in his constitutional right to try to get to the bottom of an election that there was visual evidence it had been impaired with in Fulton County. I mean, I know that Sherry, that the inclination of people on the left is to ignore the fact that Fulton County pulled a fire alarm to stop the counting because it wasn't going the way they wanted, and then said there was a water leak inside the building that they were in, and they had to evacuate the building because there was this water leak. And then as soon as they took every observer out, so there were no observers, they then went back in, the election officials went back in and resumed counting, and they pulled ballots out in suitcases that they began to recount, all on camera. And yet we're supposed to sit there and say, there's nothing suspicious happening there? I'm sorry. And they can say all they want. They can say, this is normal procedure. Bottom line is, it isn't normal procedure. You say, we're not counting anymore tonight. And then you get everybody out who's an observer, and then you start counting again. Guess what? There's no person on the right or the left who in an honest world would say that's within oil, that's real. That's something that should have happened. Yet that's what happened in Fulton County. If any place in America where you have visual evidence, actual videotape evidence that an actual voter fraud occurred, it's Fulton County. And yet, Fulton County is where Donald Trump's being prosecuted by a Soros-funded DA. Sorry, but not credible. And in terms of Jack White, we've talked about the classified documents case ad nauseum in this, but you want to talk about the DC case. The DC case is a straight, Donald Trump did not have a right to actually to challenge the election. That's what his case. He admits that Donald Trump had a right to challenge the election. And then he says, except for when he challenged it all the way to Congress. Well, guess what? Every other president had a right, and presidential candidate had a right to challenge elections all the way to Congress. Congress has to certify election results. They do so. Every election, they do so. Donald Trump had every right to do everything he did. By the way, if you pay attention to a video we did, a live stream we did a few weeks ago, I actually had the votes. I showed the video of the votes for Arizona and for Pennsylvania, where the House voted on whether to accept the challenge to the certified election results from those states. The House voted. They voted to not accept the challenge, and the system went forward. Donald Trump had a right to ask for the challenge to be accepted, challenge to be made. He had a right to expect that a challenge be made because of suspicion, and I think proven in many respects, proven that there was voter fraud in the system. And with the narrowness of the margins of victory, there was reason to believe that that voter fraud may have impacted the outcome. He had reason to say, let's hold off certification for 2 weeks until we can finish the investigation. The House said no. The House disagreed. That was the House's prerogative to disagree. But for Donald Trump not to be able to ask, that's a basic First Amendment right. For those of us who are schooled on the First Amendment, every citizen has a right to petition the government. And by the way, every non-citizen does too. Because the Supreme Court's ruled that non-citizens have rights just like citizens. So Donald Trump absolutely had a right to petition Congress to do their job. Congress did their job. It didn't come out the way Donald Trump wanted. It didn't come out the way I would have wanted. But the fact of the matter is that's the way it came out. The process went through, and every single person should say the process worked. Congress got the opportunity to say yes or no. Congress chose to say no to Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is now being indicted for actually pursuing that. That's insane. We're allowed to pursue legal remedies, and we're certainly allowed to petition Congress. And if we're not, then the whole system fails. So thank you for weighing in, Sherry. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to go through the 4 indictments and how they're all bogus, and why you should actually look at them with a critical eye and say, if the person who was being indicted was named Hillary Clinton, where would you stand? Let's see what else we have here. You think Bloomberg is a reliable news source, blah, blah, blah. Betsy again. Sure, like Biden has broken any laws in his time in politics. It's once again, this is an argument, Betsy, that I really personally don't like very much. And the reason is, if I'm driving down the road and the speed limit is 55 and I'm on a freeway, right? The speed limit is 55 and I'm going 67, let's say. And people are buzzing by me at 75, 80 miles per hour. And the cop pulls me over because I'm going 12 miles an hour above the speed limit. It really doesn't matter what anybody else around me was doing. It only matters that I was doing 12 miles an hour above the speed limit. And if the guy gives me a ticket for 67, and I was going 67, I violated the law. So, the comparative everybody else is doing it is an argument that I'm not particularly fond of. I will tell you that, which is why we deal with the specifics of the charges and not and really just say, because a court of law is not going to look at, gee, did Joe Biden do it also? It's going to look at, did Donald Trump do this? because Joe Biden, presumably would also get his day in court, which we know won't happen. But it's a challenge, and we have to win this by taking down these charges one by one. And the volume that Jack Smith has created, along with Fannie, whatever her name is, or Fooney, or the Fulton woman, and the DA of Manhattan has created. The objective of having so many charges is to make it seem like he must be guilty of something. That's what they're doing. They're basically trying to influence an electorate. This isn't about the law. This is about trying to influence people and have them say, he's been charged with so many things, he must be guilty of something. That's why the people point to the Bloomberg story and say, look, he's been indicted on 107 things, 137, 175, how many ever it is. He must be guilty of something. And because this is not about him doing anything wrong. It's about a coordinated effort to try to stop Donald Trump from becoming president again. And the best way to deal with that is to make a choice and be able to knock down those indictments one by one, the way I attempted to do with Sherry. So that would be, it's just my preference. It's not, I think it's a fair argument if you're talking to friends and say, Joe Biden had classified documents and they're doing nothing to him, and Donald Trump's getting the book thrown at him. And as president, Donald Trump had an absolute right to have those documents. And Joe Biden, when he was vice president, had no right to have those documents. So Joe Biden's actually guilty of something, and Donald Trump's not guilty of something. But, I think that's a fair thing to say also on the document side. See, somebody added Bush into that. The only ones that need to be investigated are Clintons or the Obamas, and the Bidens. Bush did nothing wrong. I voted for him. He did a great job, so leave Bush out of it. He's a Republican. Republicans have honor liberal stuff. Michael, I don't know that I can. I worked in the George W. Bush administration, which those of you who are regular attenders probably know. And I'm proud to have worked in the George W. Bush administration. I was Labor Department. I learned a lot about labor. We did a good job, and I was very proud of the job we did. And the fact of the matter is, there were George W. Bush didn't have, he never had, didn't have the same kind of challenges that have faced Donald Trump. And part of the reason he didn't have those challenges was he didn't shake things up very much. By and large, we got attacked. 9 months into his presidency, we got attacked. And he spent his presidency trying to deal with that. And it was and by and large, he did an okay job. Did a pretty good job, by and large. The problem is we then ended up in the middle of something that we had no idea how to get out of. And the idealism of the State Department of being able to nation build and try to create representative democracies that reflected American values out of nation states that were run by Islamists just didn't work. And so one could argue that the world is in worse shape today than it was in 2001. In the Middle East, certainly, in some respects, because of what ended up happening in terms of trying to nation build in Iraq and Afghanistan. Didn't work. And, that's just, sometimes you just have to look back at history and say, good idea, I supported the idea, I wanted it to work, but it didn't work. And so you have to learn from that, move forward. Now, I will say the Middle East, the saving grace in the Middle East is that Donald Trump was president and created a pathway to resolving a lot of the Middle East crisis through partnerships that Donald Trump uniquely forged through Saudi Arabia. Didn't finish the deal with Saudi Arabia because he didn't win the election, at least didn't get to be president again in 2021. But with United Arab Emirates, UAE, Tunisia, other Muslim states that have opened the door to being peaceful with Israel and having true economic ties and development. That is directly a result. The Abraham Accords are one of the great foreign policy achievements of our time. And even the Biden administration is now sitting there going, well, maybe we need to do something along these lines, after doing everything they could to undermine them for the last 3 years. It is fact of the matter is that is the one singular hope that exists for peace in the Middle East. And that's a Trump accomplishment. And unfortunately, there's a saying, there's kind of a saying, if you go into a store, you break it, you bought it. Well, unfortunately, when we decided to go into Iraq to go after Saddam Hussein, we broke it. And when we broke it, we broke a system. And Saddam Hussein, not a good guy, a tyrant. But we ended up replacing Saddam Hussein with an Islamist government that resembles very closely Iran, and turned over Iraq to control by Iran, making them a vassal state. That's what we did. We took out the majority, the Sunnis, and ended up getting the minority, the Shia, to be the dominant player in Iraq, deconstructing a balance of power that existed between Iraq and Iran for 50 years. So sometimes when you break something, you bought it. And sometimes when you break something, you end up getting cut. And we broke it, and our plan to fix it didn't work. When we broke Iraq, Humpty Dumpty couldn't be put back together again. And a lot of people have been harmed as a result. A lot of death has occurred as a result. So it's sometimes in life you make your best call, you do the best you can, and the idealistic idea that you can get people to embrace a pluralistic government doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, that's you fail. The idea fails, and what falls, and you end up with disaster. So foreign policy perspective, that's not what I was going to talk about today, but sorry. But that's what they kind of took me down the path of. Let's see here. I always like when somebody says you're right. I don't know if he's saying I'm right. Neil Chapman, you're right, because if Trump was a normal citizen, he would be locked up awaiting trial. No, he wouldn't be. If Trump was a normal citizen, he wouldn't have any of these problems. Because if he were a normal citizen, none of these special counsels would have existed. So Neil, you tricked me by saying you're right, but you're wrong, because if Trump were a normal citizen, none of these special counsel chasing around stuff would have ever occurred. Let's see here. Diana Palmer. Obama corrupted the FBI and the justice system. Him and Hillary taught Biden you could do no wrong. Diana, I think that is true. Obama corrupted the FBI justice system. One of the things that happened in 2012, 2013, I'm trying to remember I can't remember. I think it's 2013. President Obama changed the way that you actually hire people in the federal government. And in doing so, he basically let people be hired based on resumes as opposed to going through a pretty laborious process. And Eric Holder used that to stack the Department of Justice with a bunch of far left attorneys who were political, who were weaponized the Department of Justice and weaponized the FBI through that same process, where we ended up having people who were more interested in social justice than in justice, and more interested in political retribution than in being apolitical. And so we ended up with a politicized FBI, a politicized DOJ, and the rest is history. And it's directly from Obama. And the example that came out of, I wouldn't say, well, Hillary certainly, but after that, The example of the last 4 years of the 4 years of the Trump administration was that anything can be done to Donald Trump, and the people who do it won't be held accountable. And so, if there's no accountability whatsoever for trying to undermine and undo a presidency and a presidential election that didn't go your way, then you can get away with going after people for essentially trying to make certain that the election that was just held was fair and honest. And that's what they've done. And they've just they've created much higher stakes for the election of 2024 and any future election, because the loser dare not complain, because the precedent that's being set is if you complain about the outcome, the federal government is willing to come after you, using the full power and all the money of the federal government to try to take you down. And that is the true lesson of all this, that unless we are successful in restoring a First Amendment right to challenge elections, unless we're willing to do that, we have absolutely lost our capacity as Americans to have fair and honest elections. And it scares the heck out of me, folks. It scares the heck out of me. And with that, Diana, since I agree with you and you agree with me, I'm going to just end on that one, because it's always good to end on agreement. We're going to continue to have another discussion tomorrow on something else that strikes us as interesting. News of the day, probably talk a little bit about the Republican debate tomorrow night. And I welcome you to come back. And if you have subscribed, please, thank you. If you like what we're doing, hit a star, use the star thing. This is a function of us spending real time and energy trying to figure out, get to the bottom of stuff, and then sharing it, and hopefully providing you with information that you can use when you're talking to your friends, and be smart with facts, and take it to be able to be someone who is the influencer, who's able to influence with facts, as opposed to just depending upon kind of vague knowledge. So with that, if you find this helpful, please share it. That really matters. And subscribe. This is Rick Manning signing off. Thank you very much for watching us today.